Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Fusion 360 Live. Today, we're going to be talking about Dynamo Studio inside of Autodesk. So I'm Wayne Griffenberg. I'm a technical specialist with the Autodesk Fusion 360 team. And I'm here to walk through with you on some basic steps of getting started with Dynamo and what it's about. And we also have Brad Tallis with us. He's checking any questions you guys may have to be able to get some good answers for you.
Sorry again, the audio is terrible.
No worries. So Jason's also here to help to make sure that you guys can be able to hear me really well and be able to see me well as well and working in the background. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free and ask. This is a live stream, so your questions are important to us, and please feel free to reach out. And Brad, I have him looking at some of those questions. So let's get started. So I want to take a look at what Fusion 360, or what the Dynamo for Fusion 360 is, and how do we work with Dynamo Studio. So I'm going to switch over to show you my screen real quick. So Dynamo Studio, and if you might want to ask, you can easily do a quick search and find out. This is the Dynamo Studio, but I want to bring up my browser. So if you do a quick search in Google, you'll find Dynamo Studio is essentially a BIM tool, right? It connects with Revit. For people who are doing like large structures and interiors for buildings and such, things like this, like structural materials. But it's also a design tool that you can use to help you make your products. If you want to 3D print them, if you want to machine them, if there's anything that you guys would like to make, you can use this to help drive your designs, right? So Dynamo Studio, like I had mentioned, it's really a BIM plugin, but we also have a plugin for Fusion 360 that you can download and work with. And I'm going to show you how to find that as well. So that's Dynamo Studio. Really what it is a standalone programming environment that enables designers to create visual logic to explore parametric conceptual designs and automate tasks. So that's a lot, but that really does sum up what it is. So if you're not really a programmer and you don't really like code, it's sort of like an in-between where you can connect different nodes with wires and such, but represents that code logic. So let's dive in. You can see some of those pictures down here in the view here, what it kind of looks like. So I'm going to kind of give you an idea of what that plugin looks like for Fusion 360, right? So let's jump in. So here we have our view. I'm going to bring up Fusion 360. So here, I just made this simple little motorcycle rim kind of a thing, right? So I have some features in here. They're just multi-bodies going in there. And so I have some parameters behind this that are driving. So you can easily make parameters. So if you go into your model, your solid model, and underneath you'll see that little function that will bring up your parameters table. And you can easily make these parameters. So in this case, I have them connected to a pattern as well as an angle for each of those little hexagons there. And you could drive your design with those patterns. But what it does, Fusion 360 is going to connect that design data into a more of like a conceptual programming interface. So what you can do is you can download. There's a tool you can download in the add-in store called Dynamo for Fusion. Right. So this add-in, we can find it inside of our add-ins work space here, or add-ins drop down. So if I go in and look for Fusion 360 App Store, and in the App Store do a search for Dynamo, and you'll find that there's a Dynamo app, Dynamo for Autodesk Fusion 360, that you can download and plug in. Right, so that download will give you this app. And now if you want to connect it, you just simply select it and you can say, okay, there's already open for this design. Let me close out that view because I was working on it earlier to practice. And now let's see if we go into hit a Dynamo for Fusion, it'll start Dynamo. And so what it's doing is making a connection in the background between, it's actually writing a script live. So it's actually taking that information that you have from your parameters and it's bringing it into this interface of Dynamo. Sort of looks like this, right? Kind of like these little wires and nodes, and you have these long strips, because I have a lot of parameters set up in this design, right? So this is my output. It's actually creating this JSON. It's a JavaScript in the background that you can actually see for each of those different parameters when you update them. Oops, let me grab that. So when you update those different parameters, you can walk through that little watch window and see what those parameters are doing. And then so what I want to do is I want to connect to these different features, right? So I'm going to use a simple interface. Let's say we're going to grab a number and type in number. We're going to do a quick number bar in here. I'm just going to do a number slider. So now it sort of like adds this little slider bar in here that I'm going to kind of put in the parameters I'm looking for. Let's say the max will go up as 24, and I want to increment by 1. I can take that number slider, and you can do your cut and paste, Control C and Control V. And I'm just kind of adding these sliders, and what it does, it connects a graphical sort of interface to those different parameters, right? So you can kind of drive your design right behind inside of Dynamo, right? So there's our number 1. I'm going to say N2, and I could probably say H because these are all hexes that I'm kind of driving. But let's say number 3, and then we're going to make number 4, and then you can name these whatever you'd like, right? So and this one's going to be our angle. And then I'm going to change that slider a little bit because this one I'm going to start at 0. Right, so I'm going to start that at 0, and we're going to go up to 90 degrees, and I probably want to go every 15 degrees, right? So I can make that angular, I can make it, you can actually use some code variables in here, and all I'm going to do is connect these wires to those different features, right? So now, if I shrink this down a little bit, you can see in the background, I already saw that I had some updates in here. So let's say I want to make something like, I want that first pattern to be like 3, and then over here I'll make it 3, and then we'll go up to 24, and then 24, and I can go back to my design and say update, and you can see it updated it, right? So if I jump back into Dynamo, and I'm going to say I want that to be, let's say go up to like 6, and then maybe over here I want 12, and then maybe we'll go down here to like say 18, something like that, and we'll make these like 11, 12, something like that. And then you'll see it'll update live. I'll say yes, and it actually updates my design, and I should be able to see that update according to that design look that I'm looking for, right? So these are actually going all the way through that little hub, so you can get some really interesting designs. You can kind of play and see what works, right? So if I want to change the angle, let's say I want to make this 15 degrees, and it'll give me an update directly in here, and I'll update, and you can see those little hexes kind of turn 15 degrees to give me this little kind of slope effect, right? So I'll make it like 30 degrees. So it basically connects graphically, in here. I'm able to drive the design and change those parameters directly inside of this design. So that really is what connects it. But what I'd like to do is I'm going to take a little bit of a different step and a different approach and show you a different design in a different way that you can use this tool to help you make your designs that you can make castings from, make your molds, 3D print some different textures on a feature, right? So let's see a little bit of a different usage of Dynamo Studio. So I'm going to go to, let me change this real quick. Oops, there we go. So I'm going to go into a design real quick that I have set up. So I'm going to close this one out. So let's close out there real quick. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to start a new design inside of Dynamo, but in Fusion I'm going to switch over. So I actually started to design a handle like this, right? So doing this natively in Fusion and a lot of CAD systems would be pretty tough. Like this is an old-time kid's bicycle handle, right? So we got those little bumps in there, and I could see, if I made a pattern of this and try to have it pattern to follow along that path and then follow along this path might be kind of tough. And it's something we could do programmatically pretty easily inside of Dynamo Studio, right? So I'm going to walk you through that process, right? So I'm going to open up in my data browser here. I have that bike handle kind of like native, the way we just basically designed it with the surfaces, right? So I have a body and then a sketch. And in that sketch, we just kind of revolved that sketch around, right? So we took this shape and just made a revolved model. And so on this face, I'd like to put those little bumps, right? And you think about how you would design that in a design CAD tool. You'd make a plane in here, and you would make a sweep angle, and you kind of make a little circle and a sphere, and then follow that sweep and then pattern it. It can get pretty ugly. So a way that we can do this is I want to export this surface, right? So you can bring T-splines, you can bring surfaces, different bodies into Dynamo and manipulate them. I want to keep it simple, so I'm just going to go and create a surface offset from that face, right? So I want to make sure I'm not going to chain it, so I just grab that one face. So it just created an offset surface. I'm leaving it at 0, so I have an exact surface the same as the model, right? So that surface, I'm going to export this surface as a SAT file that I can work with inside of Dynamo. So I can do that. I can go up here and do a quick export if we wanted to, and I can export that out. I actually wrote a tool in the API to be able to do this for me, right? So if I go into my tools, and by the way, there is an attachment that you guys can get from this YouTube Live. I left a link where you can download a zip file that has all these files in it, right? Including the script that you can load up to be able to do what I'm about to do now. So you guys have access to that. So if I go into my add-ins, I'm going to start a script in my add-ins, and I call this one SAT output. So there's SAT output. I'm going to start to run it, and it adds this little SAT button up in the corner. So it takes whatever design or surface, whatever body I have open, and if I click it, it actually makes an SAT on my desktop. So let me move that up real quick. So I have this on my desktop. There's our SAT and called Dynamo part, right? It's called Dynamo part on my SAT. Let me go into my, here we go. Let me bring up Fusion again real quick. So I created that SAT from that body, right? Just a surface body. I'm going to hide that for now. And now what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring that SAT into my Dynamo Studio, right? So let me bring up Dynamo Studio. We're going to start a brand new project, right? So let me go into New. And this is Dynamo Studio, and again, keep in mind, this was really written, or it was designed and worked on for so that we could work inside a BIM, right? It connects to Revit, so we're actually working in a very large interface. So what this interface is actually kind of blown up pretty large, but I'll walk you through and how I would work with that space. But so this is Dynamo Studio. So the first thing I want to do is I want to import that SAT file, right? So I'm going to do a quick search for import. Now, so the interface is like this sort of graphics view. I have these different tools in this toolbar on the left in my library, right? And we also have different spaces, right? So this is my programming space, and this is my CAD space, right? So it's not a super strong CAD tool, but I mean, it's enough to be able to get your design. And when you bring in some T-splines, it gets really interesting looking at those different surfaces. But I'm not really expecting to do a whole bunch of CAD in here, mostly programming, right? So, but I want to give you an idea of what it looks like. So let's go, and first thing I want to do is I want to import some geometry. So I'm just going to type in import, and I can quickly, if I spell right, I can quickly get different tools that I can import, right? So if I'm looking for import an SAT, actually I can just say import S, and you can see we can get T-splines in here, TSM models, TSS models, but I want to bring in import SAT from a file, right? So I know it's on my desktop, so this is a node, right? So this is my geometry import. I want to get it from a file location, so I'm going to need a node for file path. I just start typing in file path. Now I get a node for file path. And here I'm going to browse, and it'll connect right to that Dynamo part that I put on my desktop. And I'm going to connect them with what we call a wire. And so now it imported a model. So you can see it imported that surface in the background here. It's kind of tiny. The graphic view, it kind of gets a little bit weird right, when you're working with it. So, and it comes in tiny, and there's not really a good way that you can get this screen to zoom all the way out. You know, it's like a weird settings input, right? So what I usually do is I scale it up to work on it, and then I'll scale it back down before I export it, right? So there's our surface. I'm going to jump back over, and now I want to be able to add something to that surface, right? So the next thing I want to do is I want to create, well, first let's scale it, right? So I'm going to go into here. I know I'm working with geometry, so it says right here I need some geometry output from my SAT file, right? So I'm going to go into geometry, and I'm going to type in scale. So I want to scale this thing up, and so I can say I want to scale by amount, and it adds a node in here for scale. Yeah, there we go. Oop, there we go, 2 of them. Let me go into here, I'm going to click, I'm just going to delete one of them, just hit the delete key, and I'm going to connect that geometry, and then what I need is an amount to plug in there. So I'm just going to go and find a number block, right, a simple little number input, and I want that to scale up 10 times, right, so then I just connect that and it scales it up 10 times. Right, so I made a copy. It basically, this is new geometry that was scaled up, and if I don't want to see the original, I just right click and I turn off preview. Right, so now I can see that I have this model in the background here, and we're going to kind of manipulate that model a little bit, right? So The next thing I want to do is I want to actually start to add some points along that where I want those little nodes, those little balls, the bumps to kind of go along this surface, right? And I kind of want to grid it out. There's one quick parameter that you can add. It's a surface point at parameter, right? So there is a list online. So if you do a search for Dynamo commands or Dynamo library, you'll find a list of these different commands that you're trying to do. I've kind of learned it just by going in here and thinking about what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, and then I do a quick search, right? And I find out somebody else who did a very similar thing on a surface, and then I come back and I kind of apply it, right? So if I'm doing point, let's say by parameter, or I'm going to add a point at parameter, that's what it is. And so if I do like something like this, surface point at parameter, so my geometry is a surface, so I'm going to connect those nodes. And now I want to look at the UV surface, and I want to put a pattern onto this surface, right? So I need to point out what that pattern looks like. So in this case, I'm going to add a code block, but you can easily do this by separate number blocks, or you can do it, I'm actually an array. So you can look up an array, and you can tell an array in the view surface, an array in the V surface, but I'm going to do it as a code block, right? So I'm just going to type in here an array. So I'm going to go from 0 to 1, and it's kind of like a parameter name. I'm going to have 20, let's say, points along that U surface, right? So I'm going to plug that in. That's my top one. I'll do the same thing. We'll make it simple, and we'll go from 1 to 20 on the V surface, right? So let me add that colon. So now I can connect that block, right? So I'm going to say the output for U, the output for V, and we should get our nodes along that surface. It's interesting. It's not, there it is. So it just took a little second, but you can actually see those nodes are sort of wrapping around the surface. And that's what it's doing. It's taking those coordinates along the UV, and it's applying each node along the surface. Now I'd like to have it as a grid, right? So the surface point at parameter isn't like initially set up as a grid. It's going to take it literally. So what you want to do is you want to create enlacing, create cross product. So what that does, it actually adds that 20 times around your product, but it knows that we're trying to do it as an array, right? Versus just simply making those points along the UV surface. So if I do cross product, and now it adds that grid, it's basically taking that array and wrapping it around 20 times, right? So now I have those surface points, and now we want to add something to those surface points. So I'm going to add a sphere, right? So you can make different shapes that you'd like to. You can even import different shapes. There are different libraries where you can find, like I got this one called Lunchbox that you can download that has a lot of different geometry that you can find. And then these different packages, if you go to package and you do a search for a package, now it gives you some pretty good design, you know, some good descriptions. Right now it's not finding any, but it gives you good descriptions of what some of those packages look like. Actually, I have one in here, search for manage. It should be search and should bring me to those packets, but it might be my connection here. But so usually you'll see a list of different packages that you can download that do different geometry or different things, different math, different coordinates that you're trying to work with. A lot of those packages are for Revit and BIM, but we can also apply them to our design as well, right? So in this case, I'm going to use some spherical points, right? Or add some spheres to my design. So I'm going to put in sphere, and it's going to look for different types of spheres that we can use. For this one, I'm actually going to do its center radius, right? So I'm actually going to go by center point radius. So I want to know exactly what the diameter of the sphere is. And of course, it comes in super huge by default, right? So now I have two things. I'm going to say center point and radius. And I can see my radius is going to be an integer, or I can even make it a decimal, but I'm going to copy that number. I'm going to just highlight it, Control C, Control V, and I can copy that number over here, and I'm going to say I want to make that 20, right? So I'm going to go into here, and that becomes my radius, and I can see it shrinks it down, and the main point it puts it on is the origin. I'd like to put it on all these different points, so I'm just going to connect those points, 400 of them, as you can see when it pops open down here. I'm going to connect it to that center point of the sphere, and what it does, it makes an array now of those different spheres on my body, right? So, or in this case, the surface. So it should just take a second here, and it usually updates pretty quick, and then I get those spheres all along that surface like that. That's actually what I'm looking for. It took that surface that I brought in, that I created, and you can actually move this around a little bit to see, you know, what that looks like along the surface, and that looks pretty good. I have a pretty good spacing on there. If I want to go back, I could change that programmatically. So now I want to be able to get this back out to my model so I can, update my handle with these spheres, right? So the next step would be, I'm going to actually take this and simplify it a little bit, right? So I have 400 spheres. That's a lot to work with when you bring it back into Fusion. So we have functions where you can simplify and make that more like, let's say I want to make 20 rings of spheres. That might simplify it. So I have a function called union, right? So we can do a union, and by union is going to take those solids and it's going to now combine them to make a very simplified solid. Now you see we have down here, I should see only 20. Now we get 20 different solids in here. So you see there's only 20 now. And you could do this again and get down to one, simple model. But I'm going to keep those 20 because it just makes it a little bit easier to control. And now I want to output that, but before I do, I want to change and I want to scale it back down. So I'm going to go into my scale. We're going to copy that over. I'm going to paste that scale back in. And I can just disconnect that node, and I'm going to do it right here. And so instead of scaling it up 10 times, we're going to actually go 0.1. So we're going to scale it down a tenth. And you'll see it scales it down back to our original size. And if you want to hide this, again, you can always go through and turn off preview. Now we want to output it to our desktop. So I'm going to go and do an output. So let's go to export. I'm going to do an export SAT. I want to export SAT geometry. Right, so that's the thing that we have here. Our geometry is going to be exported out. And again, I can do that same file path. Let's create a file path. Okay, a file path node. Oh, there we go. And then for my file path node, I'm just going to go right back to my desktop here. We're going to call this one our handle grip, right? Or texture, right? And so now we have our handle grip texture. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to connect this back into our file path. And now if you look, I'm going to minimize. Now we should have on my desktop, let me just move this. And now we have a handle grip texture SAT file that we can bring back into Fusion 360. So now let's do that. Right? So I'm going to upload the SAT file directly into my project here. There's my handle grip. Actually, this isn't it. I'm going to go to my desktop. There's our handle grip texture. We're going to upload that, and I should be able to get that handle grip with all those little beads in a file that I can import directly into this part as an assembly. Right, and then from there you decide if you want to break the link. You can now do Boolean remove or Boolean add, and you have those beads in your design. I like to keep the link so that if anything changes, and I'll walk through that process with you. So if anything changes in the design that you're working with, you can always do that update inside of Fusion. And I like that idea of being able to update it inside of Dynamo and have it automatically update in my design. And I'll walk through that with you. The important part is that you have it linked as an external assembly or an external part. And then anything that updates will update inside of our final assembly. So let me go through that. So now we're going to import that into our design. So let's insert into current design. It's going to bring all those beads, if you will, or those bumps into this design. And then, of course, I want to be able to change it so it looks like the appearance is the same as our initial design, right? So, and now we have that little handle, right, that we can now 3D print out and have a kid's bike handle, or we can make a mold from this. You can break the link and make a combined, feature. You can combine and remove. And you can also make them little holes in here too, like you would do a golf ball, right? So that's another application where you can do this to make things like that, right? So, so now I have this handle, but I want to make some changes to it real quick. Well, that's good because I have Dynamo open. And let's say we want to do that, right? So let's say I'm going to make a quick change. I'm going to say this is going to now be 30, right? So I'm going to change this to 30 thou. It's actually scaled, right? So, and then in here, instead of having these things every 20 points, because you're going to see it gets really dense, let's say I make these 15, right? And I'll make it 15, and we'll have a grid of 15 too, right? So now it's going to update and space them out a little bit more, and you can really play and kind of get an idea. So I don't have to do anything in the background. It just updated that model automatically because I have this node in here to create from whatever we have is going to make that grip texture update, right? So now I can just go back to my design, and in here in that handle grip texture, I'm going to say import new version because it changed outside of Fusion 360. right? So now if I go and grab that file, I want to upload this one again, right? So I select it, I'm going to say upload, and now my texture is going to update according to what I just changed inside of Dynamo, right? It created a SAT file on my desktop, and now I can import that or upload the new version. And this is using that AnyCAD in the background. It's very similar when you have like a SolidWorks part that you're bringing in, or a Pro E part, or if you bring in like, a part that's like in, IGES or STEP, but it's really if it's coming from another CAD system and that gets updated in that other CAD system, you guys can update it directly, right? So you can update all of your new changes and add them to your design, right? So let's go and do that, right? So now I can see there's an update. I just click the update, and you'll see all those beads will now change. They'll be the bigger ones, and they'll be spaced out a little bit more. And now I can try out this design. So you can make multiple designs, right? So in a way, you can configure them to be different designs, and then save that configuration as a file that you can upload. Cool. So I know we went through kind of quickly. We did a lot some time here. So that's really what I wanted to show, is that workflow and how we get from our initial design, what that looks like, to be able to do it inside of Dynamo Studio, to be able to import those models and different ways to work with the nodes, to import models and import different types. You can bring in like your models out of Fusion as if there were splines and all that stuff as 2D geometry, but you can bring in surfaces. Your T-splines can come in as well, and you can work with them. In this case, I brought in SAT files and output an SAT file, and then you can manipulate them with different nodes, right? So then we were able to export it back into our model and create this neat handle. The first step around too, I also wanted to make sure we showed you how you can get Dynamo for Fusion and work with it with your design, create your parameters. You could do size parameters. I can always jump back into that handle, open it up, and then we can change the sizes of different things pretty quickly. So with that, I'd like to open it up and see if there's any questions. I know Brad and I have been in the meeting, and he can let me know if we have any questions. Cool. Yeah. Any questions you have, I'm happy to help and get some answers for it. Oh, let me go out of here. Yeah, I'm just looking into YouTube Live right now, so I can see if you guys have any questions here. Cool. I hope you guys find this was helpful to walk through and get a better understanding of how to work with Dynamo. There are ways that you can connect between your Revit designs and Fusion 360, and also go back in those different aspects of Dynamo Studio, where you can collaborate directly too. So you can get Revit models and then be able to manipulate them through Dynamo Studio to be able to get them into Fusion and vice versa, right? So there are some tools that you can use. And I know our development team is definitely working on a true path. We have that with Inventor, and then we have AnyCAD where we can connect Inventor with Fusion. And I know definitely in the future that's a direction we're going, to be able to connect those files together from Revit as well. Cool. All right, looks like there's a couple questions there. Awesome. Yep. It looks like I'm looking at some of the questions we have here, and Brad's been asking or answering a lot of them, so I appreciate it, Brad. Awesome. Looks like some of them. Is there a Dynamo Studio for the Mac? Actually, I'm not too sure if we can work on the Mac with Dynamo Studio. I'm pretty sure it's PC only, but let's take a look, actually. Let me go into the main site here. We go back to our Dynamo plugin. So the plugin, it looks like it's only for Win OS. Oh yeah, look, it is. the plugins for OS as well as it's only for Win64, so it's not for Mac. And in here, I think it's only for, we have system requirements. It's only going to be for Windows. It just said right there, available only for Windows. Unfortunately, there really isn't a Mac version for Dynamo Studio. Very cool. Looks like another question was about what's the cost on Dynamo. If we go up to, again, if you do a quick search and you find their website, let me bring that back up real quick. In here, it actually tells you on the website down here that it's $310 a year. Right, you get a subscription for $310 a year for Dynamo Studio. So yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of tools. I think the question was, you know, as far as like education, Autodesk does offer many tools free for education. I do believe Dynamo is one of those tools that you can use in school to get access to the Dynamo for free. And of course, you have to be a student, right? So we now have the interface that you can do to make sure that you're a student at a school. They do when they might do a background check on that to make sure that you're applying it to school. You know. Cool. Let's see. Let me get back into here. Awesome. It looks like Daniel's asking if we could change the pattern. We can change the pattern. It's just a matter of what's being driven in that code file, right? So if we want to be able to change the pattern, have it closer, if I go back into Dynamo Studio, and then this is what's driving the pattern, right? So you can always do this and drive it by a code block. This actually is the pattern where we are driving it for 15 nodes, but if I change this and say make it 10, you'll see that we'll get the pattern will decrease on one side. So there we get like a 10. So it's basically doing a grid around the part. You just have to define exactly how dense that grid is going to be. Right, so we made a change. It did update automatically in the background to that SAT file. So if I go into here and I say, you know, there's our handle grip texture, I can go in here and I can say import new version. So, and you can do your own pattern. It depends on what the surface is. Like if it's a sphere, you could do the certain pattern around the sphere. As I had mentioned earlier, you can do things like a golf ball. Golf ball, bring in those little beads and you can remove it from the model. Right, and then it's just a matter of uploading it. One question is why use Dynamo instead of the built-in Fusion parameters? So to do stuff like this, right? So to have these little beads in here, you can drive things, patterns, and such off of your parameters. It looks like it's waiting for it to upload. But you can drive that off of different parameters, right? So you can use your parameter table and kind of drive a lot of those. That's weird. Oh, I don't have any parameters in this one. But you can create parameters and drive it. But to be able to get that geometry to be right off that surface like that, it's a really difficult thing to do with parameters inside of Fusion, where a tool like Dynamo Studio just makes it a little bit easier. It does take a little bit to get used to the nature of looking at it from this graphical point of view. But being a coder, I've written, you know, JavaScript and well, I'm dating myself by saying Pascal, but even in the past doing like Python scripts as well. It's sort of like the same way you would do it with, you know, code, linear code, writing in code. It just kind of does it graphically, right? You can connect different nodes, and it just opens up a few doors for you. So if you're kind of geeky and want to program, it does make a pretty neat interface. But I like it because you can do stuff like this that you can't normally do, at least today. I would imagine in the future we're going to have a lot more robust tools inside of Fusion that you can do surfacing and make these different points and stuff really easily. But just at least today, this gives us a tool that we can automate such things. Just makes life a little bit easier. Nice, nice. You're welcome, Ron. And he's my hero too. I like Brad's awesome. He does some great videos, and I like to, he does updates, and I watch the videos on what's updated in Fusion. And definitely, if you follow Brad's YouTube channel, I highly recommend doing that. He's awesome. It looks like there's a question about using the API. You can definitely do that if you're a programmer. You can definitely do things like this using Fusion's API to do it graphically behind the scenes, and you can drive it by an Excel table or drive it by parameters as well. It is a pretty neat way to work. If you're good at programming and driving it through the API, it's definitely worthwhile, especially if it's something you do repeatedly or a specific use that you need out of your models inside of Fusion. Definitely an API program is the way to go. But some people aren't really into coding, and they're not really knowing the language of Python. You can easily do some things like that in this interface as well without having to do all the longhand code, if you want to call it that. Cool. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so you guys have awesome. You guys have that access to the link that you can download, and it has the this actual project, right? All the nodes that are in here. I think it's called Handle Grip DYN. You can open it up inside of Dynamo, and you'll have access to it. We also, oh, I'm hitting the wrong thing here. There we go. So you can download that. I also included the SAT file and the original file, right? So the Fusion file of the handle. All right, very simple part that you guys can download and try it yourself. And so all of it's there. Sometimes I watch these videos, and it was pretty awesome watching some of the amazing people. They are amazing at this. They know their stuff, especially on the Revit side. There's some experts out there. I love to watch their videos, but sometimes they don't really offer much on the YouTube video where, hey, if I had those nodes, I can practice it myself. So I like to make sure that as I go through, I offer you guys that you guys have it. You can download and try it yourself and get access to all the stuff we did here. Yeah, but if you're going to use it, I recommend using the add-in for Fusion 360 to connect directly to Fusion. So cool. Well, with that, it looks like Brad's been a champion at getting some of your questions answered. Yeah, it looks like he's been on top of those. So yeah, that's what I really wanted to show today. Hopefully, it's been helpful for you guys. And awesome. Yeah, any questions to follow up, you can always ask them on the YouTube channel. Just keep adding to the description, adding underneath the comments. And please feel free, comment, let us know what you think. And there's things that you're working on that we'd love to hear about, projects that you're working on where Dynamo would be a great help. Something I just enjoy using, something that I learn and want to get better at. And I think it's really neat to be able to do some of these things. So yeah, so please comment, let us know some of the projects, and if there's any help, we can connect you to the right people if we don't have those answers for you. Awesome. So thanks for joining today, and we're going to see you next time. Awesome. Thank you.